I recently had an individual coming to me, a government employee who's been working for pretty much his entire life. And his main concern was what would happen with his GEPF money if GEPF happens to bail out Eskom. Now, perhaps you're in that position right now. Perhaps you've been working for GEPF or government for a long, long time, and this is your hard-earned money. And now you're in this position where you're not exactly sure which route to go, whether you should continue staying, working for government, or whether you should just leave. Well, this video is going to give you insight into exactly what you need to focus on when making that decision. But more importantly, we're going to look at what would take place if that had to transpire. So what happens to your money if GEPF happens to make that call? Now, as a pre-frame here, I want you to bear in mind that GEPF is what's called a defined benefit fund, meaning those benefits are defined. It's all worked on according to formulas. So let's head over to the iPad, and I'm going to guide you a bit more on how this is. And this video is going to be especially beneficial for you if you are at that position where you are just feeling afraid and you want to perhaps resign. Or even if you're just at that position where, again, you've worked your entire life and now you just want some kind of peace of mind that your money is going to be safe and protected. What I want you to bear in mind is when money is with GEPF, because it's a defined benefit fund, the control of that money lies with GEPF. And that could perhaps be where your fear lies. The fact that the control is not with you, the control lies with GEPF, meaning they determine things like your gratuity. They determine your monthly income. If you are a pensioner, then they are determining how much increase actually takes place. They're also determining where this money is getting invested. So that's something that is a concern for you, control. And why this is critical is even if you had to resign, you want to make sure that that control is not given away to the insurance company. So I'll guide you towards the end of the video. How do you take control here? Because this is your main sort of fear. It's the fear of uncertainty. The fear of having this money to be with GEPF, or the fear of having it to be with the insurance company, but not having control, just like depending on someone else to make investment decisions, depending on them, depending on the markets, and you not having that control. So because GEPF is what's called a defined benefit fund, it then means that each of these benefits are determined. So each of these benefits are predetermined for you and calculated, meaning it's all working according to a formula. So you would notice that they can forward project values for you even. So if you're leaving at the end of the year, you can ask for a GEPF statement as at the end of the year, and they can calculate that because everything is working according to a calculation. So let's understand that practically what it means, right? We'll use this as your fund. So let's assume this is your GEPF fund. And we know that every month you are making a contribution and GEPF themselves would make a contribution, or our government is making a contribution. So you contributing towards your fund and government's contributing towards the fund. And that is growing inside this particular pool. This is the money that's actually getting invested. So if we had to illustrate that, we'll say this is then what's getting invested. However, that pool of money that's getting invested doesn't affect what you are getting because of the formula that is being calculated. Meaning if your formula is going to determine a value for you, I'm using an example here, the formula is based on your years of service and a few other criteria. But let's assume that we'll put the formula down here. So if the formula says that you have a figure of 5 million, that's your resignation value in this example, then that's exactly what you would be getting, the 5 million. It does not matter what happens to the fund and how this money is getting invested. Meaning, even if this happens to go into some type of investment structure that you're not happy with, like if it was an ESCOM bailout or any other entity that's getting a bailout or any other place that money goes into that you don't feel 100% comfortable with, yes, it affects the fund as a whole, but in terms of the formula itself, this is the commitment from GEPF, meaning this is something that they are saying that they are going to honor. So you'll still collect this. Now, there are instances where the fund itself could be higher, meaning the return of the fund could increase. That doesn't mean that your 5 million is going to increase, because remember, it's all calculated according to a formula. And the flip side is also true, meaning there are instances where this could decrease. And it doesn't mean that your 5 million is going to decrease because of it being determined by a formula. So this is something that you sort of are assured of because of it being a value that's calculated. This is the formula that they use to structure it. You see, what you're not assured of is how would they manage that money? Where is it being invested? So when we go back to that word that I was telling you earlier, which is control, in this case, the control rests with GEPF because they are determining how that fund, where your money is being invested. But you also can exercise control over your resignation value. Now, there have been a lot of members in the past who've been afraid, and perhaps you're in this position right now where you are thinking, maybe it's time for you to resign. When you've been working for government for so many years now, it's hard work, and you've built up this nest egg. At this delicate age, you definitely don't want to have that money go away. You can't afford to lose any part of it. But before you head down the space of wanting to resign, a lot of groundwork has to be taken into account. So one of that needs to be tax. Now, I know you're probably thinking that I shared with you on previous videos how you could get the tax to be zero if you are resigning. Yes, those are some of your avenues that you can tackle. But if you are taking this in cash, as I've shared in the previous video on YouTube, then this money is subject to tax. And you want to be very mindful of that. And you actually want to do that planning in advance so you prepare. But if a huge chunk of your money is getting lost in tax, it's an immediate loss. See, it's an immediate loss, something that you cannot recover from. Whereas the concern you might have here is not an immediate concern. See, it could be a concern if those investments are not good. See, that's a possibility. But if you are withdrawing in cash, then immediately the tax itself is a reality. You are going to pay the tax. I have discussed with you on previous videos that you could move to an approved fund. And remember, preservation fund is not the only option here. So you want to analyze what your different options are before you transfer. And doing this will help you to save on tax. But then you have to start to consider your liquidity. What's the next step once it's in the approved fund? Because the approved fund is sort of like a parking bay. Your money is going to be housed in there waiting for you to make a decision. Depending on which option you choose, you could, if it's a preservation fund, you could access some of that before you get to 55 or your retirement age, and you could leave the balance in there. But what would you do with the money that you have on hand? And how would you continue to earn an income? How would you make sure that this is enough for you to live comfortably? And then very importantly, where does this money get invested? Because on this end, when you were, now that you've got this money within GEPF, the concern is the control is with GEPF. Now, if you have to move it to an approved fund, and this is not done correctly, then ultimately what's happening is it's a shift in control, but now you're moving your control to the insurance company. Either the insurance company or you're moving it to the markets. Again, it's still not in your control. So this is where you need to get sound financial advice. Sound advice to compare the two options of retirement and resignation, and then determine whether you are actually in a position to be able to leave prematurely or whether you should sustain yourself for a little while longer. But either way, it's not going to cause any harm getting that advice now. And again, as I've always been saying, if the advice is very good and practical, you're in a position to do the tax planning in advance. Meaning before you even sign any document, you can have an idea as to what this tax is going to come to and how do you create ways in which you could avoid having to pay that tax. In addition to that, you can create what's called an investment strategy, meaning within GEPF, here it's GEPF controlling your fund entirely. But when you're using the insurance company, there are hundreds of places that the money could be invested in. See, so again, when the financial planning comes in, that element, assume it's me that's helping me with your planning. So I want to start to analyze what it is that you are aiming to do. So if you are leaving from GEPF, what's making you concerned about leaving from GEPF? Is it important for you to have security? What sort of return are you looking for? So all of that then gives me an idea as to what sort of strategy I need to create for you. And that then puts you in control. So notice the difference. If this work is done in advance, the control shifted away from the insurance company, shifted away from GEPF, and put straight onto you. So you have the full power there. So to answer the question, we don't know with 100% certainty how GEPF themselves might be investing that money. It's one of those things that's out of your control. And the more that you think about it, or the more it stresses you, the more you're just going to work yourself out. What you want to do in a case like this is just get information so that you prepare yourself for what's going to happen going forward. At some point in time, it might be a month down the line, it might be 6 months or a year or a few years down the line, you're going to reach a stage where you want to make that critical decision. Should you retire or resign from the GEPF? And at that point in time, what you do now, the information that you acquire now is going to then empower you and determine how successful you are going to be in making that choice. Now, this channel's got a lot of information for you as a government employee that you can start to absorb and get yourself familiar with in order to make the right choice, whether it is retirement or resignation. It also is there to ease some of the doubts, because there's a lot of rumors that spread amongst GEPF about what could happen, what couldn't happen, and this channel is designed to ease all of that. It's designed to offer you that protection. It's also designed to give you some practical information. So it's techniques and strategies that you can use for yourself to test out in order to know that this is working out beneficial for you. So on that note, if you've not already done so, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you're able to get access to content as soon as we produce it. And then I also want to hear from you. So what are your concerns when it comes to GEPF and the investing? What's your fears? If you are taking a decision to retire or resign, what's motivating you? And have you found this video helpful? And if so, what has this video done for you to shift your perspective? So comment below to let me know. And I want to wish you well with your success going forward.